Now, directly from our studio to yours, the game everyone likes to play. Question: what will keep you from becoming more conscious more than thinking about becoming more conscious? Answer: that's right, thinking about anything. Yeah. That's right. Next question: I don't get it. Next answer: you're right, you don't. Say, Biff, do I still get to keep the prizes? Well, sure you do, Ralph. You brought them here. Well, gee, Biff, I didn't know we were back to talking about what I think about. Ah, rats, Biff, just rats. Come on, Ralph, don't act like that. You've had a whole lifetime to get used to it. Yeah, you're right, but it's still a rat pain in the ass, Biff. And for a moment there, it seemed like several people back in the control room were about to cry. Oh, rats, Biff. Fact: if you remove the man-made seriousness from anything, it collapses. Consideration: maybe there's some things you shouldn't remove the seriousness from. Well, I said maybe. After school that day, Professor Delicato remarked on how striking it is to be human and to have the wide array of choices available to us. Such as we can choose to be born, live for a while, and then die. Several senior faculty members are of the opinion that the professor is in need of a sabbatical, if not some other attention. A myth. One of Adam's sons, a generation removed from Eden, on his own discovered what was going on, and in his attempts to describe it to others, began referring to those interested in such things as intellectual rebels. Well, this went along fine for a while until God got wind of it and told him not to use terms like that. So he decided to try and come up with a better one. One man asked his mind, once you've seen what life's really all about, isn't it kind of yucky to keep having to live among pygmies? And replied, yeah, but what are you going to do? Yeah. P.S. That last part may not have been a myth. Only that non-apropos to anything in particular is apropos the thinking of the more alert. Not knowing what's going on makes one tend to be whiny, and often, apparently, most sincere. The closer he got to Constantinople, the more one man began to realize that if he got any better looking, he might eventually try and take himself to bed. Yeah, I know it sounds weird, but finding out the secret can do that to you. And dropping their robes to half-mast, the unexpected choir began to sing, "In paradise is no perversion, all urges merge as one." The difficulty with the ordinary mind perceiving what constitutes the goal is in its natural inability to not distinguish between what is the goal and what is not. And with that, several people who had just recently boarded the train decided it was already time to debark. Disbark. Arf, arf. Facts, conversation, and conclusion. The simple stick together. What are you doing here? Oh, this is where all my friends hang out. Yeah. Moral: I would rest my case, but I can't bend over right now. Although so-called guilt is of no more use to the anxious than any other common emotion, one attempting to undertake this activity should, no, must, privately suffer over episodes of everyday inattentiveness which continually reveal the non-personal arrangements to which one must be forever vigilant. But see, this kind of discomfort, willfully adopted by the few to alter the operations of their own neural system, when faithfully seen to, does not cause suffering, but rather a transcendency of the condition of consciousness that brought on the whole affair to begin with. Okay, a condensed version. Though those working for ignition may internally be at 6s and 7s, they have actually come to love the dicey game of chance that has made their private intrigue possible. Okay, more direct still. You're not really yet on the rocky road to paradise if you can't enjoy the journey itself apart from notions of destination. Under proper conditions, even the ordinary can realize that. Humor that hurts is not really funny. But further refined is the fact that humor based on hurt is no humor at all. As similar as the two may sound in words, the second is far removed from routine comprehension in that, were it, common forms of entertainment would be seen for what they are and no longer be entertaining. After leaving the hospital that day, Dr. Metterlink began thinking about how expected it is for most of men's social gatherings to involve the ingestion of drugs and other substances intended to affect one's awareness, as though perhaps it was a requirement to make such activities possible. Later in bed that night, he further reflected on the connection between things being possible and things being tolerable. And in so doing, as he lay there, he smiled. Not that it was funny, but rather entertaining in an informative kind of way. They asked the visiting stranger if he would like to join them in their worship of their local gods and heroes, but he declined, noting that he had picked up sufficient travel sores on his feet to preclude the need for additional stuff like that. Each morning, upon arising, one man would take a quick survey of what his mental operations were up to and say to them, "Very well, carry on," and leave it to them, since he knew that's what would happen anyway. More distinguishing marks. The simple love to discuss the inevitable, but as though it were not so. To his family reunion, once he decided to attend, one man brought his jeans. That's correct, publicly. Right out in the open, he brought and acknowledged them. Talk about your nervy bastard. Just a traveling on a poem. You might hold back a bus, but you can't hold back a plane. The difference between us and them is being able to tell the difference. As an acknowledgement of their humanity, men are given to say, "I'd even forget my head if it weren't screwed on." But I ask you, what kind of excuse is that for being human? Some psychologists, philosophers, novelists, and critics held a convention and wouldn't let anyone in but them. But it got to be tricky. What with them actually trying to tell who they were and all. After the comments appeared to be concluded, several, nay, more than several, people in the audience stood to signify their objection. By one mythical account, life originally tried to please everybody, but soon realized the self-destructive character of having an interrupted food chain within a closed system. You too can realize that regarding the routine operations of your own mind. Well, you can if you get a bit more conscious. And now, that popular feature of the show, How It Goes. Same as from last time. Those with nothing better to do won't do any better. As he was tying up his boat at the dock, Admiral Quincy began rolling about in his mind the curious fact that men will not make for a new shore unless they're made to believe that their present position is despicable. And while storing the sailbags below, was struck with the greater curiousness of why he had thought the word despicable in his original musing rather than something that would seem to make more sense, such as his present position as dangerous or immoral or illegal or something like that. If bribery is indeed the mother's milk of politics, then so too is it to a man's routine mental operation. One man's thoughts proclaimed, "How dare you accuse me of accepting payoffs for doing my job?" But the guy just chuckled to himself, thinking, "How else are you going to get anybody to do what you do?" Then there was the instance of the man's mind saying to him, "Well, it's easy to kick somebody when they're down and out." And the man replied, "Well, don't be down and out." And now tonight's quiz of discombobulation. Question: what's dumber than a caterpillar who's never tried to fly? One who's realized the ability and tries to tell about it to those with still no interest. And a helpful gentleman asks, "Haven't you people ever heard of advertising?" As a reward for cleaning up his room real good, life gave one man his choice of prizes. Be either dumb as shit or be dumb as shit and not know it. I will have the decency not to ask how you would have voted. The flock into which you were born wants you to remain loyal. And if you're everyday sheep, you will. This is normal and there's nothing wrong about it. I think we can stop there, since by now you've got to know what the punchline for the more complex would be like anyway. No matter where he looked in his dictionary, one man found only words. "Sure, I may have shin splints," said one man, "but at least I have shins." Sometimes it's difficult to get sheep to see what you're pointing at. Their little eyes have a real hard time focusing. Fabulistic moral, maybe. Aren't you glad after all that you're a human? Okay, those feeling woolly and short of 9 yards don't have to answer that if they don't want to. The matter of human hobbies fully explained once and for all. Well, it's about time. I couldn't agree more. That was the title. Only the simple and dense are interested in politics, economics, art, religion, sports, literature, health, and anything else you can mention. Well, it's about time, and I knew you couldn't agree more. A mythical history of illegal appropriations, or a mystical history of illegal appropriations, or a history of illegal mystical appropriations. No. At first he stole from his dreams, then he stole from others. Next he stole from his own thinking, which brought him to an understanding of what it was that fuels these extraordinary dreams. After many years of mystical efforts, a monk asked the master of the school, "Am I sure I really want the final awakening and enlightenment?" And the guy passing for the master replied, "What child is happy to be taken from a carousel? And where the hell do you get off using the terms like final enlightenment? What is it? You know something I don't?" And thus were they both greatly amused in that extraordinary dream. Oh yeah, some people clinging to the sides of the caboose as the train continues to whip along believe that they won't fall off as long as they keep talking about it. During a timeout, as a player was being carried from the field, a spectator asked a mystic, "Just what is the difference between talking about something and thinking about it?" And the guy passing the post-vicarious hot dog replied, "You can be silent outside the stadium, or you can be silent in the stands." And the fan asking was suddenly overcome by neurological heartburn. A chieftain remarked to his son, "To even speak the name of another brings a warrior close to dishonor." Ordinary consciousness is like a camera taking individual still shots, while a more complex version films movies. More railroad lore for those lured by the mysterious. If you're unsure of the tracks in your immediate vicinity, hook up to an engine that's obviously on the way to someplace, especially if you can't tell for sure where. It's not simple that life leaves people frustrated at the station. It's your fault. You weren't even supposed to suspect that they were conveyances that actually went anywhere. See, said local conditions, it's your fault. It's always your fault. But that from a source not without a self-interest in the matter. Another of the difficulties in keeping track is that those who are serious and sincere regarding man's mundane affairs are about as dumb as you can be, while those who are not are equally dense. It's like this. Ordinary is as ordinary is required to be. If you try and conceive of your own mind as a physical universe, complete with all appropriate galaxies, solar systems, stars, planets, and attendant life forms, it can give you an awful headache or make your head swell way up, far beyond normal. Remember, when you drive a Buick, the choice is yours. To remind himself of what he was doing, one man would water his plastic plants every time he read a book. All right, you owe me a quarter. Today's finding: stuff that's funny is not funny if it applies to you. No. Yeah, I agree. I don't see the connection either, but I found the line in a magazine article, and it was so neat that I just wanted to use it someplace. On another world, the effort to extend one's individual consciousness was divided into 3 schools. The first taught methods to try and still the mind. The second promoted activities designed to bring thoughts under control. And the third approach was said by its proponents to be either too complicated to describe or else too simple. On one side is the sayings, the knowledge of it easy, the recollection and execution, one tricky mother. Topography for the blown away. Is from the center to the diameter actually a distance? Or how to tell you might actually be getting somewhere? You start forgetting to worry about whether you're getting somewhere or not. And one kid griped, I liked it better when it was merely geometry. All right, we're even. In another universe resides a legend that says that their gods initially created a reality of X dimensions. But then as things heated up and they began to get rather annoyed at some of the mental creatures' antics, they began increasing the power of quantity X without fully revealing to them the nature of mathematics. All right, I owe you a quarter. Yeah. Also, you might additionally conclude that you're on the move when things get so complex that they begin to get simple. A man who knows what he's talking about isn't actually talking about what he seems to be talking about. If conscious attention's the path, then what better pavement than originality of thought? The hip traveler's getaway tip. Even where there is no particular mystical method, you must pretend that there is. A man who knows what he's talking about isn't actually talking about what he seems to be talking about. Now get the hell off my bus. Yeah. And yours too while you're at it. Only things apropos to nothing in particular are apropos to thinking of the more alert. Some of them stick in your mind and some don't. Let me ask you why, out of all the myths known to man on every part of this planet, in every age, that the most common, it's almost impossible to find them not involved with battles and warfare. I will assume that you have some notion, some suspicion of the fact that all of the myths, all of them, if they're over 100 years old, just to pick out a rough figure. If they're over 100 years old, they were sufficient allegorical intent vis-a-vis the attempt for a man to experience some new stage of consciousness, no matter how they appear now. All myths in religions, in academic mythology, in common literature, in fiction, but anything that apparently is a myth, if it has survived several generations from whatever its source, and no matter through what means it was repeated and recorded and repeated, it had at its heart, or at its heart was one person somewhere struggling to extend their consciousness, somebody attempting to achieve that certain extraordinary goal, which is no great observation by now, because all religions, civilization itself, in a very diluted manner, is still an extension, a continual omnidirectional expansion of the human nervous system being driven to continually evolve. That is, humanity as a whole. The idea of some great secret work and attempting to awaken consciousness to another level, okay, that's exactly what this is about, and anybody who's involved with this and finds it of particular interest, that's exactly what they're involved with. But it's not that big an exclusive club, because all of humanity is involved with the same thing. Life forces everyone to do that. It's just that those who apparently are mystics, transcendentally inclined, it's like they can't wait for the parade. So all of the myths in some way reflect the desire to scratch in that unknown place, to evolve in some way that seems non-specified, that seems extremely difficult of description. Having said that, I'm back now to the question, why is it so common? There's almost a rule that all of the myths, in one way or the other, are involved with battles and warfare. Knights, men fighting gods, gods fighting one another. It would be easy to at first say, which would not be untrue, but it'd be easier for me to say, and not untrue, for me to say, well, what that is reflecting still man's crude physical past. That the ordinary level of human consciousness is such that that is all ordinary minds are intrigued with. That is the only thing that will capture their attention sufficiently for them to hear a short tale or fable, to hear it to completion. I could say, well, the same sorts of people that moving into our own allegorical structure, same kinds of people that would move into the den, into the library, and read books on spiritual myths that have to do with warfare, are not that far removed, in fact, from those still sitting back in the den watching TV, watching rugby and football. I'd owe you 50 cents. All bets are off, by the way. That it is not untrue to say that all the ideas of warfare, the most common probably being that of good against evil, the gods against the anti-gods, the good gods against the bad gods. And it would be simple enough, not untrue, to say, well, that's why these myths are still involved, continue to be involved and based around some sort of tale having to do with a warfare, with some sort of battle between two forces. But I can be more truthful than that. Or I can be less not untrue. I can be more, less not untrue. If that was not untrue, then I can be more not untrue. Now you got it. You understand, to be more not untrue about something does not render the former untrue or inoperable. It is just an extended version of it. A more extended version, notwithstanding the fact that that does represent, it is sort of fairy tales for children, intellectually speaking. For men to still get carried away by the science fiction movies of good forces out against evil forces in the universe, against a knight going out against some tyrannical king in another land, the good angels fighting the bad angels, the good spirits fighting the bad spirits in the underworld. Nice little simple children out in the woods and being attacked by wolves, by witches. It is not untrue to point out that that is still a intrigue. It is still a throwback. Of course, you people got to understand, you can refer to a throwback, you can refer to something being temporally anomalous, and it's not really so. Because that's to say, if we're standing in Los Angeles, to say, can you believe that those people in Montgomery, I mean, we're sitting here, we all agree, it's noon. Can you believe that those dumb bastards, they claim it's 10 o'clock. I just got off the phone to them. They exist simultaneously, of course. But it would still appear to be, I could point out as being, all ideas, well, as long as there's religion, this is still functional. As long as men have religions with a belief in an extra systemic force, a God outside this system, that it is still all these stories, all the religious tales, the parables, etc., the struggles, some warfare, is an appeal to man's continuing hormonal level. It is a reflection of the continued weighted proportion of his interest being run on the bio-survival level. Same way that people, as I pointed out, if it makes it any clearer, that the demographics of those who track football and basketball, especially those that actually go out and pay money, not sit at home and watch it, quote, free on TV, but those who go out and buy season tickets and et cetera, are above the medium and all around the world educational level. That you find people staying around in the PhDs and masters at the tea party at the fine universities, and a large part of their conversation be taken up about basketball, which is nothing wrong with it. But to believe that man, even though he may be all dressed up, slicked up, good haircut, college education, graduate degrees, that he is still not intrigued with sports. And if any of you are trying to think, if you're ordinary people and trying to think of numerous examples you count of people you know with education who do not, do they read gossip? Are they interested in murder trials? Will they even watch the news? If so, if I could still bend, I would rest my case. But back to that which is even more not untrue. It is not simply that these myths of warfares, battles, are a reflection or a callback or a continuing intrigue to man's cruder, hormonal, survival instincts. It is more than that. Let us now, for the sake of argument, consider we're speaking of some group of people on this planet who are a bit more intellectually complex, or those who actually believe that they are interested, if not actively involved with some so-called mystical school, thinking, method, discipline, etc. Let us, for the sake of this discussion, give them a bit more credit. Well, let's say that at least they were here and heard me say that and go, you're right. And I can do better than that. Okay, good. If you can do better than that, here we go. We're going to do better. And see how soon you jump off the train. Arf, arf. If we give credit that there are those involved and have been, those people on the planet who are a bit more enriched in their vision, can take in the input from life, such as these myths and these tales and even religion, and translate it in a manner a bit more complex. That is, that they're past the point, not that it still doesn't exist, but that they're past the point of being limited in what they consider and what they think about vis-a-vis such myths and tales and even religion, that it's simply a battle between good and evil. Assume that they have the ability to periodically think in something resembling a metaphorical manner. That is, they just know that there is something beyond that. It's not just groups, it's not men being a battlefield, it's not a struggle between good and evil, it's not even a struggle against stupidity, it's not a struggle against the Philistines, the dunderheads of the world. I'm giving them credit periodically of being able to sense something past that. Making that a given in this discussion, then the question would be, well, what is it that they would conceive of? What is it that they would suspect? What is it that they would even propose to themselves as a possibility of that against which they're struggling, or should be struggling? All right, here we go. You may clean that one up. If we had somebody who is past the point of being limited simply in their interest in life and things further down the evolutionary scale, not just interested in warfares, not just interested in sports, not just interested in murders, not just interested in the negative gossip that seems to be the norm of the info input to the ordinary mind, that they just know there's got to be something else. And they got to know, they suspect, they're just convinced, all but that much convinced, that all of these myths, even religions themselves, with all these stories about struggles, originally rose from somebody involved with the same interest that they now have. And they sit and they look at them and they think about it. And they're past the point of actually taking the idea of God against Satan, Jehovah against anti-Jehovah, the great good forces of Shiva and all of his or her cohorts, and then John Dillinger and all those other roughnecks. And they look at it and they go, well, it can't be that. And yet they know it's a struggle. They know that there's something in them. There's something in them that is resisting, that feels a certain kind of off-putting, a certain kind of less than local affection for what they're surrounded by. And again, these kind of people, we'll give them credit that they're no longer involved with a great hostility. And yet they know there is something against which I feel the need to struggle. It just is. And it sees in the myths, it sees or suspects, is all but convinced, even in the stories, the crudest of stories, that that man and somebody got caught in the middle of God had some of his lesser creatures that he created, decided to stage a coup. And that set up this struggle between good and evil. And the kind of fictional mind that I'm conjuring up now that's a bit beyond that sort of fundamentalist religious level, they know it's a struggle of some kind because they feel it themselves. But they know that the idea of good against evil, even if they have no real comprehension of what evil represents, they know that the common conception of there being evil is at least a mistranslation of something else, even if they don't know what. So the point is, they know that I'm not struggling against evil. It's not that there is, say, evil objectively afoot or outside of me, trying to take us over. They don't know why, they just know, well, that's not my problem, that's not it. But yet they feel, and correctly so, or if you prefer, not untruly, not incorrectly so, that there is a struggle here. Because if there was no struggle, we wouldn't even be talking. So then the question to them, and if they were trying to, after the fact, allegorically, metaphorically, translate that which has gone before, translate what appears to be the literal thinking of man up to this point, they look at the stories, they look at the religious tales, they look at the myths, and they see within them a common thread of it being involved with a warfare, with battles going on. They are no longer satisfied at all with the premise and the translations and interpretations that it's between the two forces, any two forces that have heretofore been named, that can be easily named, good and evil. The smart people against the bad, the civilized against the uncivilized, the progressive against the regressive. They may even sense, well, all that, none of it's absolutely untrue, but the people who wrote that, the parts of it that intrigue me, is somewhere beyond these literal translations. Now so there they stand, intellectually speaking, knowing that there is a struggle. There's no doubt about that. There is something against which I am struggling, or I want to. but I'll be damned if I can put my finger on it. I can't even find for sure what it is. All right. There is the answer about why, or my answer to my rhetorical question to you, as to why is the common thread, the most common theme, the almost, without exception, theme of the historically considered worthy myths built around battles and warfare, of a struggle, of a battle. The answer is, what are you going to call it? I don't mean that it couldn't be called something better, but back to my ordinary person now, or even a more perceptive ordinary person. Even if they know that they suspect, all but convinced, that these ideas of a battle and the names given to the forces involved and the pictures and the stories, as appealing as they were to me in my younger days, and as interesting a movie as they can make out of it. That's not it, but why do they keep? Now back to my person, I can point and say, well, you don't know what they call it. And they go, well, no. And I go, well, hell, they didn't either. So they call it actual warfare. I'll go ahead and tell you, what the struggle is against the neural status quo, which makes almost no sense whatsoever. All of the sentence, that term made grammatical sense. A struggle against the neural status quo. It makes sense, except it almost makes no sense whatsoever. All you got to do is stick it right in your own mind, right back there at the intellectual, back at the literal, even what you might consider the high point, the better part of your intellectual or literal thinking. The best you can do. And you think, the neural status quo. The sense makes sense, and you may even be inclined to go, oh. But if you think a minute, oh is probably off the blocks too quickly. The neural status quo. Because then you're left with, if you pursued that a bit further, well, the neural status quo is not something to unconditionally be struggling against, because were it not for the neural status quo, I could not even get off the blocks. I couldn't even be thinking contrary to what you're saying. I could not even be analyzing what you're saying, much less disagreeing with it. God, I wish my back was better, and I would. Maybe if I used both hands, I could rest it. Well, maybe I could just sit it down on this stool here. But no, most of you wouldn't be happy. You'd go, nah, put it on the floor. Go ahead. Bend it over and rest it completely. I will not give you the satisfaction. Think about all of the stories that you've ever heard, all the way from the Hindu tales, the Mahabharata, running even longer than did some of the serials back in the 40s of the Green Hornet and Buck Rogers. It was a long mother. I don't care what you say about followers of, quote, the Hindu faith. If nothing else, they got patience and lots of time on their hands. Anthropology within anthropology. Thank you. But think about all of such stories. And they are, as I said, not only are they not untrue, they're not without some worthy and even workable merit. To get into how common also it is, but not just the myths, how about that which seems to have grown from myths, sometimes assumed history, of the martial arts, even either as some sort of individual sport of taking it up, and it being a physical representation, being a discipline that is an offshoot of some mystical intent. That into a more collective version of the ideas of the knights, the crusades, the samurai warriors, that all of that, even though I'm taking it now from the area of assumed strict mythology into the area of assumed collective real history, that there were groups of men that not only that lived almost a metaphorical life, that they did one thing, or a symbolic life, to use my own descriptions, that they actually fought for a warlord, They actually fought for the king. They actually fought for the church. They actually fought for some worthy cause. But not only the physical fighting, that, if you read the myths in a certain way, and some people continue to attempt to interpret them there as, that these people, even though they were collectively, literally, without any doubt, will assume, engaged in this kind of physical battle to protect the king, to seek the Holy Grail, to seek some worthy hidden object somewhere, some sacred object, or to just defend the king, which, if you're going to get that deep into the mythical interpretations, that the king, the warlord, the church, the pope, who represents a higher state of consciousness, and they're out defending it against something, or they're out seeking to find it. If the king's been dethroned, or they took away his holy scepter, or the magic sword he had that gave him his power, they're now out there seeking it. And you can take that kind of collective, assume literal history, and see that in a sense, they, if that were true, that they were living symbolically, that they actually did that. But if you're going to take that kind of deeper interpretation, then individually they were supposed to be fighting another battle. Well, aside, some of you, I don't infer that none of you got that, but it would also, if you'd like just a quick one off to the side, account for also the many stories, whether you know them or not, strewn throughout these kinds of longer epics of a mythological battle of sorts, of how one of these knights, warriors, who were charged with this higher than mundane duty, some sacred duty, the crusades, the samurais, the knights protecting the crown or the church, that individually, as they were out doing battle with whatever it was, or engaged in a search, which there are always people trying to keep them from completing the search, to find the sacred object, that there was, strewn throughout them, are instances given wherein one of the particular warriors was about to make some demonstrative progress along the lines of whatever the goal was, and was sent specifically into combat against some specific foe. It's not just a collective battle, that the king or a voice says, you may be getting closer, but you've got to go over and find the knight, the warrior with the green hair, with the red hair tied back, who will be holding a sword encrusted with diamonds. And so he sees the guy, and he goes over and they get in battle, and he's about to hit the final blow, like he's broken his opponent's sword. He's got him down, and he's about to kill him, which would bring to fruition the search, or it would do away with the warrior that supposedly, or the force that was standing between him and the fulfillment of the search. The reclaiming of the lost wisdom, or the claiming of it the first time, whatever it is, the achievement. And he's got him down, and this opposing force is about to kill him, dishonors him in a sense, which they keep trying to describe, that he looks up and goes, and spits on him, is the most common one, gives him he spits on him. And he's about to kill him, and then doesn't, and leaves. And those stories, they're much further back, it's not the point, but they're much further back than even in the West, the Middle Ages stories of the knights. It's all over the world, those kinds of stories. But consider what that represents, that there is no such force once your understanding is greater of it, once you understand what you're struggling against. Because this is not here giving a course of mythology, may I remind you, as interesting as some of you may find this at times. Remember, if it's apropos to anything in particular, it's not really apropos. Why else do you think I use these specific examples? Because they're meaningless. But here we go. Interesting, but meaningless. Ultimately. But consider that here it is in that story, you're fighting one of the primary foes. Or if I could have made the story even more intense, that the voice comes down and tells him, or he gets a message that says, here, that the opponent, this one guy, not the whole force, maybe the rest of them have already wiped out, but there's one guy over there behind that hill, behind that tree, with red hair and a sword that they describe with all the jewels. He is the one who is standing between you and the completion of the task, you and the fulfillment of the adventure, the reclaiming of the prize, the finding of the prize. And so there it is. But now remember, we've already established that you can, or talking about my fictitious character, person, is established that they understand there is no such battle as that going on. I mean, it may go on, but that is not the point. There is nobody physically. There is no Satan. There is no demons. There is no living exemplar of evil who is standing in my way trying to keep me from achieving whatever it is I'm after. So here the story, though, represents that he gets down, and here it is. He's within a momentary stroke, one blow of enlightenment. And whatever the force is, represented in this case by an actual physical opponent, looks at him and goes, and he gets so mad that he doesn't kill him, and he leaves. And I have heard that, again, it's not the point, but it is so common that people have even tried to describe it, ordinary people, having to do something with honor, which, as always, they're not untrue. They're not totally incorrect. It's just a childish interpretation. That the hero would not strike the final blow when he was, once he had been made personally angry, that it would in some way sully the final achievement, that it in some way would dishonor him to kill him just because he got mad. Now that'll work, but they're kids, they're 15-year-old kids reading some comic book or the classics, or they still make classic comic books, the comic book versions of King Arthur's story, the Mahabharata. And they can listen to this story and take it as being, well, it would be dishonor because a real warrior will not kill somebody just out of anger. He was sent there on a sacred charge. Even if they don't understand it. A 15-year-old kid can buy that story about, well, it'd be in some way dishonor. And I don't know for a fact, but now that I'm about to say it, I do know for a fact. I bet you right now in these schools of karate and kung fu and all such as that still believe, again, not totally incorrect, but still at least infer somewhere down the street in a strip shopping center, next in an old place where dry cleaners closed up. They're in there teaching it, and if they heard this story, they might go, that's true, or they're probably teaching something every now and then about, wait a minute, the whole point about this is to bring yourself under control and etc. But if you did actually have to physically use it to protect yourself, it should not be in anger, that would dishonor a true kung fu thing, and they have, I'm sure, some sort of ritual, and now, I'm not making fun of it, it's just a crude version, and they would say that the whole point of being a martial artiste is so that you will not engage in combat and warfare, will not harm someone else in anger. It is an unworthy emotion to a true, black belt or somebody, to a true warrior. Now let's get to a more complex version. Remember, my person with a deeper understanding realizes there is no such physical opponent as in that story. You understand? It's not that the story about, well, he would be dishonored is why the guy, the knight that was about to strike the final blow, and his opponent there helpless on the ground, just before he's about to die, spit on him. And it made him mad, and he didn't, and he walked off. He knew he'd have to come back and do it some other time or under some other condition. Not that that's not true, but now consider, back to what I'm trying to describe from this person who has a more enriched understanding of the possibility. First, you absolutely understand the story is allegorical. I mean, absolutely. It's not just symbolic. It's not that you'll ever find anybody physically trying to keep you in your present condition. You're not physically ever going to find somebody that if you sit down and talk to them, you find them in the 100 stacks of your library. You find them in a coffee shop. They're trying to be a dope dealer. Somebody really important in life. And you talk to them about your attempt at what you're trying to do is awaken your own consciousness. You're trying to reach you say, you ever heard of the idea of Buddhahood? And they go, ooh. The enlightenment? And they go, And you go, that is my life's work. And they attack you. Or they say, I was afraid of that, or I've been sent here. I heard that that's what you're up to, and I got news for you. It's not that simple affair, my young friend. There are forces that must hold that in check, and we're watching you. How do you think I found you? Why do you think you sit here and told me that, a complete stranger? No, it shall not be, and I warn you now. And I could find you later. I know where you live. I'll follow you. I'll cut your tires. I'll kill you. It's not going to happen. All right? So that part, as far as it being symbolic, that is that the tale actually represents that, but represents something else? At best, it's metaphorical, not symbolic. So back to what I'm trying to get you to see from a never suspected view, and what its use is. My person, you can read you, hears such stories and knows without any doubt, will assume, that there is no physical opposition to what I'm doing. It's represented by a person, a warrior, who will stop me trying to impede my progress, either that specifically or collectively. There's no group of people. Nothing. It's just not true. And yet, the person still understands there is a struggle in which I am involved, even if I cannot name it, and even if it has nothing to do with a physical, external force. Now take the story, because I'm indicating that it has some potential importance. I wouldn't have laid on it. Remember, this was a side story. Read 10 minutes. And you look at the story, and you realize, well, it has nothing to do with physical opposition. But assuming the story still has real useful validity, then why? What does it represent that the hero, as he's about to strike the final blow, that will assume him one step closer, perhaps right at the edge of enlightenment, right at the edge of getting past this and reaching the prize, the ignition of his nervous system, his understanding explodes and he understands what life's about. And right here, he's that close. And this opposition, not physical, and my person still doesn't know what it is, but he's still, with his understanding, with his conviction, that none of this is literally true and it's not even symbolic. And there is no physical opposition. So at the same time that he knows that and he's trying to consider the story, then what does that mean that's of use that the hero, that is, the part of me wanting to awaken, that seeks enlightenment, is continually faced with an opposition that's not external, it's not physical, it's not actually opposing me doing this, and yet I feel there is a struggle. So what does the story represent? That here it is the hero, it could have been me, up that close, someday it'll be that close, and it's about to strike what is, if not the final blow, somewhere real close, and the opposition, whatever it is, goes, and it can't kill it. It cannot strike the blow. What in the hell does that mean? That if there is no real opposition out there, but if it makes you mad, you'll still go, I mean, after it does that, and you have to walk away. What in the hell does that mean? Have you ever heard the word prejudicial? Have you ever heard the word distinction? Have you ever heard the word selective? Have you ever heard the word preferential? Has anybody ever heard the story? I just heard this. Let me repeat it. Of a guy that sat there on his porch. He actually stood. But he sat there while standing on his porch, and he watched traffic go by. It never stopped. Never stopped. Well, let me interrupt that, because I thought I heard. One of the stories I heard was that ordinary consciousness is like a camera that takes individual still shots, whereas a more complex version of consciousness films movies. And that reminded me that several people asked, since they don't get printed out, for a retelling of a news item from last time. They said there was a land, or in the land there was a wind that blowed. It drove people this way and that, and into each other as they would bump with each other, fault they found. And as strange as it may sound, their complaints the wind did feed. God, those cars are close together. Wait a minute. Well, oh, Jesus. There goes a Buick. Was that my uncle? Those people are driving too fast. What the hell does that have to do with a warrior who would spit in your face once you're getting close to getting somewhere? Well, hey, don't ask me. I asked you already. What the hell does it have to do with having a maypole that you've let somebody grease the damn thing? I mean, put glue on it. What does that have to do with it? If ordinary consciousness, if the perception of life is well, when you're a little sheep up on a porch, it's hard to focus those little eyes. Not that they don't try. It's what's known as ordinary consciousness. Is when you take those little beady sheep eyes, in case of you having a doubt, either go find yourself a sheep and look at it and have yourself a good laugh if you find that funny, except remember stuff ain't funny if it applies to you, and then go look in a mirror. That a more conscious mind would not be selecting cars. It would have no particular preference. But having said all that, and I was going to say it for a long time some night, to go back to that one, within all that is a method based upon the story. Not based upon, but connected to, perhaps, the story of the guy, the final blow, about to be struck, and the force that's down, about to be conquered, that which has been staying your way, going, and then you have to walk away to come back and slay it another day. Could be represented as a method. This, I'm sure, I'm hopeful that this will leave on a nice, interesting note, because it should give a whole new meaning and glow to the term non sequitur.
No.
The non-selection of a car, the non-preferential awareness of traffic. Then there's a method, in spite of all that, that a man reminded me of one of the stories I made up, which is a real trick, but what he said, it brought it to my attention, that as he sat on his porch, he said, God, I'm sick of staying at home in my head. There it is, the traffic. An ordinary awareness keeps trying to pick them out, selects. In spite of all that, how about this as a mystical method? That of taking your own consciousness and throw the son of a bitch out in the middle of traffic.